Welcome back to my craft room. You are joining me for yet another Etsy launch video where I bring you along while I make a craft, whether it be a stuffed animal or a quilt or something else, and we have fun. I'm experimenting and trying new things, and I like to bring you guys along with me while I do this. As the title of this video says, we are making a Disney Lady and the Tramp pixel quilt. And I have made one other quilt in this style before, and it is on my channel. If you have not checked it out, I highly recommend you go do it, because that was the very first time I ever attempted this style, and I basically fell in love with it. And that was in my making a Pikachu pixel quilt. The whole focus of my Etsy shop, and the reason I am doing these crafts, is I love making crafts, I love making new things, but I also love reusing things as much as I can. So when I made the Pokemon, that Pikachu pixel quilt, all of the fabric for Pikachu itself is actually secondhand. The vast majority of fabric that I have is secondhand. So in an attempt to continue using up the borderline obscene amount of fabric that I have, we are going to be tackling this Lady and the Tramp pixel quilt. This was an idea that I had like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I drew it in a graph notebook that I have. I've just been sitting on it ever since, and you can see it right here. Look at how cool this looks. I am so excited about finally getting to make this quilt. This is going to be a huge quilt because every square represents 2 square inches. So we need to get started on it. Enough of this intro. I am very excited about it. In case you are not super familiar with Lady and the Tramp, a Disney movie about dogs. This is Lady, this is the Tramp. This is Jacques, this is Trusty. The 2 like dog sidekick neighbors, I think. They don't belong to the same family. I'm pretty sure they're just neighbors. Like they live in the same neighborhood and they all hang out. So I have right here off camera and a little behind camera actually, all of the fabric that I need. I went and the other day counted out all of the squares in every color that I have to figure out how many square inches of every color I needed. And then I went through my tote of scrap t-shirt fabric, or just solid colored fabric, and picked out all of the colors that I would use. And because this is all secondhand fabric, like most of it is not going to be an exact match, and that adds to the pixelated look, which I like. And I had enough fabric for almost all of this quilt. I did have to go out and buy like a half a yard of 2 colors and a quarter of a yard of 1 color, because I just nowhere did I have the right color or enough of the color that I needed. So I did not have nearly enough of a different shade of gray or brown than the ones I am using. And I didn't have enough yellow, just period, to do what I needed to do. And then I needed a different shade of terracotta almost shade for Lady's ears. So those were the only shades that I had to go out and buy. Everything else is secondhand, and I'm very excited about that. As you can see, I'm going to attempt to do it in the style, like sort of this pop art Andy Warhol inspired style. So I'm very excited to see how that turns out. With the Pikachu quilt that I did, the whole background was just 1 color. And that's basically what this is. I'm just doing it 4 times over and then attaching them. So again, like I said, I'm very excited. So let me turn you around and show you the fabrics that I have right now and what we're working with. So this is what's going on my table right now. I have all of these piles of clothes. This is just a bag full of red t-shirt scraps. And then I have all these sticky notes with numbers on them because I took this and on the back of it, I wrote down there you go, focus. I wrote down all of the different colors that I would need, and then how much of everything I needed, and then I assigned numbers to them. That way, as I was finding the colors and setting them aside, I would remember I want this shade of brown is number 13, which is the muzzle for Trusty. So it's going to be that part. With all of the fabric set aside, and like I said, I am almost positive I have enough fabric to do this, which is very exciting. But now comes the very long task of interfacing everything. Because this is a t-shirt quilt, I can't work with stretchy material. So I need to go through and all of the t-shirt fabric that I have that is not already interfaced, or that is just any fabric that is stretchy, I need to put some interfacing on the back of that, and that it's just a stabilizer, so it'll just stop it from being stretchy while I'm cutting it to the sizes I need it to be, and then while I'm sewing them together. Okay, real quick, something I just did was I went through all of the fabric and I set aside all of the fabric that I had that was either pre-interfaced or wasn't stretchy to begin with, and I set all of that over here, and this is all of the fabric that I would need to interface. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through and actually cut all of this up, well, as much that as I need up, to find out exactly how much fabric of each color I still need out of these. That way I'm not going through and interfacing way more fabric than I need and then wasting the interfacing and wasting my time. So I'm going to get to cutting all of these up. And the way that I'm doing this, I will explain. I'm going to be cutting all of the fabric into 2.5-inch wide strips. The length of those strips is going to vary just depending on however long of a strip I cut. I will be cutting it to be at like 2-inch intervals, like 2-inch increments. So that's what I'm gonna get to doing, and I'll show you some progress updates as I go. I bring you in because I want to show you sort of the method that I am employing right now and what my workspace looks like, because this is a lot more than just cutting squares at random. So this is currently what my desk is looking like, and on what I'm working on right now, all of this has a purpose. So these are the fabrics I have not cut yet. And then right here, I have 2 different versions of the same sketch. I have this image here that I'm using as reference for the colors. And then this image is the exact same thing as this, but nothing is colored. And all of the X's that are in here are the pieces I have already cut. So then you come to here. This is a brown that I am currently cutting, and I know which brown this is because I had this sticky note on it saying number 13. So then I come over to these, and these are 4 different sticky notes that for the 4 different dogs. And each of them have all of the colors that I am using for them next to how many inches I need of that color. And then next to the inch number is in parentheses just a number, and that number is the labeled sticky note number that is then designated to each area of the dog. So like on Tramp, I only had 2 square inches of black. Black was labeled as number 1, and on Tramp, it is his nose. So I can see over here, okay, that is just a 2 by 2 inch square. So over here, when I get to black, I can cut out a 2.5 by 2.5 inch square and set it aside and put a little X right there, and then I will know his nose is done. And I am just doing that all the way through. Now, this is gonna get really complicated, but I'm going to explain it because some of you who might be watching this and make quilts and know sometimes the obscene amount of math that is involved you're gonna understand this. And if you don't understand it, then just enjoy this absolute gibberish for a few seconds. But because I need all of these strips to be a maximum of 2 inches wide for the entirety of the quilt. I can make the strips longer. That's totally fine because I can go back through and make them look like they're more pixelated in shorter sections later. But because they can only be a max of 2 inches wide, I am having to go through and actually cut them and mark off what I am cutting and the lengths I am cutting so that I don't accidentally cut pieces that are the wrong length. Because with Trusty's ears here, for example, that we're looking at this dark brown right here that are his ears. I cut, and I had enough fabric that was already pre-interfaced to cut all but this 4x4 inch square. Now, if I wasn't paying attention to how much I still needed and where I still needed it, and I just said that I need 8 inches of this brown, and I just cut an 8.5 inch long strip that was 2.5 wide by 8.5 long, I would get to the end of this and I would be looking and I'd realize I do not have the right length because I need this to be 2 4.5 inch strips to go down and next to it down, because I can't just cut 8.5 inches in half because that would be 4.25 for each strip, and that is not long enough for either of them if I want the right amount of seam allowance. It's very complicated when you aren't in the middle of it doing it, but this is the method I am finding works so that I can keep everything straight, I can keep it all organized, I know what goes where, and it's working for me. So I just thought I'd bring you in so you saw just the extreme amount of steps I am going through to make sure everything stays organized and I don't get to the sewing stage and realize I messed up and I have to backtrack a bunch. Here is all of the fabric that I needed cut up for the fabric material that I didn't need to interface, or maybe it was already interfaced. So I have all of that, and all of that combined is all of these squares that are crossed off. I definitely have the most of Tramp right here. I had enough red to do the entire background for Tramp, which is really exciting. And I think now the only color I have left for him is the light gray. So that, or no, dark gray. Yeah, because this is the comparison for them. So yeah, the dark gray is the only color I have left to do for Tramp, and everything else is done. So that's cool. For Trusty, I only need the blue for the background. For Jacques, I need the light gray for his mustache, which I might have to hunt down. I must not have had enough light gray for that. Or I just forgot to do that part. Why did I have enough for that and not for that? I'll look. But then I need to do the green for the background. You can see I started it, but I didn't have that much green that was prepped. And then for Lady, I have most of her body done. I needed to interface more of this color. And then I started on the background, and the yellow, this was one of the colors I bought at Walmart. And I didn't realize, I don't know what I was thinking when I bought it, because I only bought, I think, a 1/4 yard or a 1/2 yard. And I need it for that entire background. So I don't know what I was thinking when I got that, and I got such a small amount of it, because clearly I need a lot more than that. So I'm gonna have to go back and get, I think, at least another 1/2 yard. I'm gonna have to measure or count that and see. But I think I might end up just getting another full yard just to make sure I have plenty, because I really don't have very much yellow fabric that I can use that's solid colored, and none that's similar enough so that it won't look really weird if they're side by side. So for that, I do have to buy fabric, which I try to avoid, but if I have to, I have to. It's not that big of a deal. So this is where I am at. Now the next step is to take these piles and get these interfaced so that I can cut them for the remainder colors that I need for these. And then hopefully that means I can start sewing soon. And just like that, I am finally done cutting these strips. I went ahead and just quickly separated all of them into their respective piles. So these are all of the strips that I will need for Trusty. These are all the strips I need for Lady, for Jock, and for Tramp. I came down to the wire on a couple of these colors. I thought for sure I was gonna have to go back to the store and buy some more fabric because I didn't have enough, and I ended up having just barely enough. And it really came down to the wire for the backgrounds specifically. Everything else I had enough of because I didn't need that much fabric, but the backgrounds, I needed a lot of the same color. And so all 4 of the backgrounds, they're all like a solid red, solid green, solid yellow, solid blue, but none of them are the same shades throughout. So there will be larger chunks that are the same shade of each color, but then there's also going to be spots of different shades mixed in all over because I did not have enough of any of those to make the entire background the same color. And I kind of like that because that's going to lend to the pixelated look a little bit more, having the different colors splotched in there. So, or the different shades of the colors splotched in there. So I'm okay with that. I'm actually pretty happy with that. But the green and the yellow especially, I did not think I was going to have enough. The blue and the red I was able to get by pretty okay, but the green and the yellow, I was like scouring my craft wall or my fabric wall over there, hoping I could find something that worked. And I just barely managed on both of them. But everything is cut now. I am praying I did not miscount as I cut everything, because that is just going to mean that I have to go through all of my fabric again to find whatever fabric I was using to recut something, and I don't want to do that. So now comes the insanely fun part of puzzling all of this together and actually starting to assemble and sew this quilt. Check that out. There is Lady all put together. Look how cool that looks. That there's just like a sticky note on the back of that paper, which is why there's like a bright yellow spot in there. But look at that compared to my little piece of paper. Like, this entire paper fits in her chest. That's how massive this is. That's so cool. Yes, I think everything is where it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to be. Yeah, so I'll show you the other ones as we put them together, just because it's really fun seeing the befores, but I'm very happy with it. Okay, it is several days later. I have come in here I wanted to lay out all of the strips of fabric that I had for Lady, because I decided I wanted to get the entire square for Lady laid out, figured out, and then I would just sew this entire square together. And I've run into a bit of a roadblock because I started laying everything out, and I'm realizing, as you will see, that the yellows, all the different shades of yellow that I have that I'm using for the background, completely drown any definition of Lady out. So if I flip this over and kind of bring it back, you can see, obviously, this is Lady, but, and ignore that blank spot. Like, these lighter shades of yellow that are kind of all in here just drown the earthen shades of her out entirely. This bright yellow that's here, like all around the edges, this is the yellow that I went out and bought. That works really well. And I was just sitting here talking with Dan. I'm kind of going back and forth now about what I want to do, because with the other 3, their color, their background color is not going to drown them out. I'm not worried about that at all. But with Lady, like, I have to change something because this doesn't look good at all. So I think I'm going to take Dan's suggestion. I need to go and get more of this yellow and cut more strips to fill in more of the background with that shade of yellow. And then I'll save some of the other strips that I did cut as just kind of little splashes of accent color. and then fill in from there as I go is really frustrating, because that means I'm gonna have to redo so much cutting, and a lot of this that I did cut I'm not even going to be using, which is frustrating because that takes a lot of time, and I was hoping I was done cutting and I could just get right to the sewing phase, but that looks like that is not going to be the case. That's the struggle with doing a quilt like this, is because I'm using so much scrap fabric and different colors, and I don't know exactly what it's going to look like when it's finished, and I'm just kind of trying to fit things together. You really don't know until you've done a lot of the work whether it's going to work or not, and you always hope it works, but in this case it didn't exactly work, so I'm having to back up a bit. But on the bright side, hopefully what this means is all of these yellow strips that I end up not using for the final lady square, I will be able to use for another project somewhere down the line and repurpose them that way, and that would be pretty cool. I will check back in, I think, once I get that other fabric bought and some more stuff figured out. I went back to the store, I got more of that yellow that I needed, and I came home, cut more strips. Dan helped me figure out how to mishmash pieces together, and then I took the time and I sewed all of the columns, so all of the vertical strips together, so I'm just left with a bunch of vertical strips, and I have them currently laying out next to each other, and I am so much happier with how this looks. Oh my goodness. So this is the progress we are at currently. There is Lady, and there are all of the strips. They're all sewn to each other this way, and now I can start going through and laying them and sewing them this way, if that makes sense. So that is what we are looking at. It will be shorter by probably like this much once it's all done, just because once you have the 1/4 inch on every single seam brought in, that's gonna cut off a couple inches here. So this is what we're looking at. I am so happy with it. I think it looks so good. I am going to, like I said, go through and start sewing these strips together, and I'm going to have to be very methodical with this step because I need any seams that line up to line up. So like down here in this corner, for example, we have all of these seams. When I pin this, I have to make sure those are as lined up as possible. And then same with up here, these 3, I mean, it doesn't look like they will line up right now, but they will. Like those, I need to make sure are as lined up as possible. And as I work my way up, you see there's like these seams that don't quite line up, and that's totally fine. But then as I get higher, then like these seams will all absolutely need to line up with each other. And then I go further up, and yeah, that was the last one on those. But I mean, you just keep going, and like when you start getting into Lady, like I need to make sure this collar lines up exactly, and the top of her head lines up exactly, and this ear lines up, and these ears line up, and you get down here, and this, her belly and her feet all line up exactly. It's just gonna be a lot of very slow sewing and slow pinning. And I'm not gonna pin, I'm gonna use my quilting clips that I have because I don't want to put a bunch of holes in this. So that is the next step. All right, it is finally time to get this entire square for Lady sewn together. I went earlier, as you saw in that little clip, and got all of these seams pressed open. So they are all open and ready to go. And now I just get to do the tedious but very necessary task of carefully pinning these all and sewing them. The last strip to sew on before this is done, and I was laying it out and it wasn't quite lining up right, and I was like, this seam here should match. Why is this like an inch off? It definitely shouldn't be an inch off. It should be 2 inches off if it's going to be off, because I've cut everything in increments of 2. So I laid it out and I grabbed my ruler and I started measuring, and one of these strips that I cut is 15.5 inches instead of the 16.5 that it's supposed to be. So now I get to seam rip a little bit, cut that one down to 14.5 inches, and then cut a new strip that is 4.5 inches to replace the little bit I had to seam rip and the lost extra inch. Okay, I have Lady done. I don't know if you're ready for this because it's pretty beautiful. Ta-da! Look at how pretty she is. I love it so much. I thought that was a crease that I accidentally sewed in. It's not, it's just a weird angle and then the light is hitting it funny. Look at how pretty. Also, how massive. This is 1/4 of the quilt. 1/4. The quilt is 4 times this size. Oh goodness. Now that this is done, I'm gonna go to bed, and then when I come back, we will jump into the next dog, and I'll kind of speed through those, but still show you progress along the way. Okay, so I have gone ahead, Lady is done, and I set that square aside, and now I have pulled out all of the pieces that I need for Trusty, and ran into a few issues. I realized this is, let me move these out of the way here. This is what I ended up with. So here is Trusty all laid out. We have his tail there, his body, and his head. Now, there's a few glaringly obvious issues here. First of all, there's a whole section of his ear right here missing. Apparently, when I was cutting, somehow I got my numbers mixed up, and I cut 2 4-inch long strips too many of his body color and 2 4-inch long strips too little of his ear color. How I managed to do that, I have no idea, but I did. So I've remedied that. I've already gone, I had more of the color. I had to heat press, or I had to iron on a little bit of the interfacing onto it because it's just a t-shirt. But I have that. I've cut out those pieces, so that is fixed. So we can go ahead and just lay those there and move these off to the side. And now that is his full-length ear. The other glaringly obvious issue is his whole head is way too dark. You can see the difference between the reference photo there and the final image here, that the reference photo has a really light colored muzzle, but when I was doing the final color checks for this, the reference photo that I found that I used and I went off of, Trusty, I don't know what it was with the lighting or the coloration of that photo, but Trusty's muzzle was almost as dark as the rest of his body. And that's what I went with these colors, and I cut out different shades of brown, but they were all still dark brown, and it just ended up making Trusty's muzzle way too dark. His whole head is just engulfed in dark brown, and you can't see anything hardly. I don't like it. Like, it does not look good. It just looks like a big wad of mud on his face, and then his mouth smack dab in the middle glaring at you. So I looked up more reference photos and realized, no, this is how different of a color his muzzle is. I don't know what reference photo I was looking at and why I didn't see all of the other reference photos on Google that I looked up. So I've fixed that as well, and I'm going to give it a try with this color, which is a like tan color that I actually used for Lady's body. So the parts of Lady that are this brown here, that is this color. So I'm going to actually move these aside here. And with you, we are going to put these in place where they need to go. Oh, look at that. That Night and day difference. That looks like a brand new dog already. That looks so much better. Cool. His mouth now is not as glaring and obnoxious. I am so much happier with that. I've actually moved from the table onto the floor, and I've taken my big roll of batting that I have. This is the stuff that goes in the middle of quilts to make them warm, and I've rolled it out some, and I'm going to lay out everything right here, as long as I don't have a cat trying to sleep on it, because this is the perfect height for this square, this block, and this is going to keep everything from shifting around. Once I lay it down, like this is sticky, well, not sticky, but it just the fabrics sort of hold to each other. So I'm going to lay everything out here so I can actually have space for all of it, because otherwise on my table it is just short enough that I would have like 2 or 3 inches on the top and the bottom hanging over, and I really don't want to be guessing at that point. So having it all laid out really evenly right here will allow me to keep everything laid out, and easily I can like leave it there, and heck, even if I needed to roll this up onto it to keep it all in place, I could do that. I just thought of that. That's actually kind of a genius idea. I'm probably going to do this with the other 3 squares, or the other 2 after this, because that's really smart for keeping it all in one place. So now I get to just play puzzle and puzzle together all of these different shades and lengths of blue that I have, and add Trusty into here and just keep jigsawing everything until I get something that fits. All right, here is what we are working with. You know, he's in a bit of a shadow because of the angle of the light, so his body isn't like actually that dark that's showing on camera. But I am very happy with how this looks. I have everything laid out. I had to play moving pieces around and measuring, try to get things to fit as best as they could, and I ended up having extra pieces. And in order to get the final spot to fit, I cut one of the pieces that I had. So I don't know if I accidentally just cut too much, or if I messed up somewhere, and when I start sewing everything together, I'm going to be short. I'm going to have to go back through and find extra blue to cut to make it fit, but that's what I did for now. So we're gonna see if it works out or not. But I am quite happy with how that looks. I think that looks really, really cool. So now the next step is to start sewing all of these strips together. Just went through and got all of the strips sewn. I am very happy to report all of them are equal lengths, so I didn't mess anything up with cutting that one piece, and I must have just cut extra background without realizing it. So there are those. I am going to roll this up because I don't want animals sleeping on it, and in the morning, well, tomorrow, I will then go through and pin and sew all of this into one big square. Here is Trusty, totally sewn together, ready to go. So now I'm gonna set him off to the side and get started on the next dog. Jock is finished, and now the last of this quilt is just Tramp. It's just this little stack right here. So I have my batting laid out, and we are going to get started on getting all of these squares where they're supposed to go. Okay, here is Tramp all laid out, and I don't know if you can see the glaring issue that I see, but his collar is also red. So what I have decided, because I was talking with Dan and that was an immediately blaring issue, because it looks like Tramp's head is, he looks like nearly headless Nick from Harry Potter if he were a dog. And that's not what we're going for. So what I have decided to do with Dan's input is we're nixing the collar, because 95% of the movie, Tramp doesn't have a collar anyway. That's what Elliot thinks of the collar. So we're getting rid of the collar. So I'm going to, I have the fabrics that I need right there. I need to just interface the light gray a little more, and then I will cut them down to the piece sizes that I need, and we're just gonna have Tramp without a collar. Elliot is passionate about this, so I'm gonna get those, and then I'm gonna get Tramp all sewn together, and then the next time I tune in to talk to you will be when all 4 quadrants are totally sewn together, or when all 4 quadrants are done, and I will lay them out probably in our living room to show you what they look like next to each other, which will be very exciting. Here is the finished Tramp laid out. We zoom out, there is all 4 of them. Look how cool that looks. Oh my gosh, that's exactly what I envisioned. It looks so good. I will say there was one hiccup that I noticed immediately that I think is going to be an actually pretty simple fix. I had drawn multiple prototypes on graph paper of this design, and I tweaked them here and there. And so when I was cutting all of the strips and laying them out and measuring for Lady and Jacques, when I was cutting it for like the backgrounds and measuring everything, I think I was actually referencing 2 different versions of those prototypes. And as a result, I'll show you right here. As a result, Jacques actually ended up, the background ended up being a solid 2 square inches longer than Lady. And I think what I'm gonna do is just keep it very simple, and instead of trying to cut and sew on a full extra 2 inches onto Lady, I'm just going to go through, seam rip, and cut the 2 inches off of Jacques and call that good, so that it will look like this rather than adding an extra 2 inches onto the bottom of Lady's. And I think that's gonna work out just fine. For size comparison, like, this is a big quilt.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really big.
This thing is huge. Like, it goes past the top of my head and like a solid 6 or 8 inches past my feet.
That's impressive, dear.
Thanks.
That's impressive.
Okay, we are back in the living room. I just finished getting all 4 of these quadrants sewn together. This is what we are looking like. It is all laid out. Everything is, it looks a little janky just because of the way it's stretched. It's fine. It's just the way it's laying down right now. But I've just laid it back down on the ground. And now it's time to start sandwiching this quilt together. We are on the home stretch. We are so close and I'm so excited. So now what we need to do is get working on finishing this quilt. So I have that laid out because now I need to measure the batting and the backing. So I have my great big roll of batting right here that I'm going to roll out and cut. And then for the backing, I had to go out and buy fabric because I need a lot of it. This is a huge quilt and I don't have enough of any one solid color. So I decided instead to go with this shade of blue. It looks like this. It is showing up a little brighter on camera than what it really is. It's a bit of a deeper blue than what's showing up on camera. And I know it's very similar to the back of Trusty, the background, but this blue, if you look at the title image of the Lady and the Tramp Disney cartoon, then the blue in the background of the Lady and the Tramp logo at the top, that's the blue I was going for. So this is the closest thing I could find. So I have this that will be the backing, and then I'm just going to bring the back around to the front to bind it. So it'll just be this shade of blue as a small little binding all the way around the outside. So that's where we're at now. Like I said, we are so close. So I just laid out the fabric that I bought for the back. This is one section right here. This is the other section. I haven't unfolded it, so this right here is folded in half, so I can unfold that and it will cover the rest of the quilt just fine. But I bought 5 yards of this blue, thinking I would have plenty extra and just being on the safe side. That's all the extra I have. I cut that really close. Oh, buddy. Now comes the sandwiching part. So what I need to do, I just realized I forgot my pins in the other room. Now I'm going to start sandwiching this quilt together, which is where you lay all of the layers of the quilt on top of each other, nice and flat, and pin the entire thing. So with this quilt, sometimes if you want thinner quilts, you only have the back of the quilt on the front, and then it's a nice and thin quilt. It's not too heavy. It doesn't keep you very warm, but you can still use it as a blanket most year round. Whereas this one and most of the other, basically all of the quilts that I make, are warmer quilts. So as you saw that big roll of white stuff, that is batting. That is used to insulate the quilt, if you will, and add warmth and weight to it. So what I need to do is I need to lay this quilt out starting with the back of the quilt, and I will lay it down so the inside or the wrong side of the back is facing up. And I'll lay that and I'll get it as smooth as I possibly can. And then I will take that batting fabric and I will lay that over top of it, keeping everything as smooth as humanly possible. And then I will lay down the top of the quilt with the top of the face, the one part you want to see, facing up. And after I think everything is laid out and smooth and good, then I will begin pinning it. So I have you set up there. I'm gonna run a time lapse and just get started layering this quilt and getting the whole thing pinned. All right, the entire thing is pinned. So now I need to flip it over and see if there's anywhere on the back that I need to adjust. If there is, usually if there is, it's because the backing fabric got bunched up somewhere and then I pinned and it kind of got stuck in that bunched up position. So I'm gonna flip it over and check that out. If there is, I'm going to have to figure out which pins are closest to it that need to be taken out so I can adjust and then re-put back in. And that'll just be a very tedious process. So let me flip it over quick and check to see what we need to work with here, or what we are working with rather. Okay, that looks really good to me actually. There's a lot of wrinkles, but it's just because things are wiggly, it's not going to be 100% smooth. So, and plus I haven't fully flattened it out as well. But that, just upon glancing and looking at it, I don't see any obvious, really bad spots. So I'm gonna roll this up because we're getting ready to work on supper. and then I will pop back in and tell you how I plan on top stitching this thing. All right, we are back in the craft room now, and what I need to do next is start top stitching this. And what that is when I take all of these layers pinned together and I start stitching the whole face of the quilt from the top. It's pretty self-explanatory. So what I am going to do, when you're doing a quilt like this, you kind of have to figure out what you're going to do. Are you going to do an all-over fun pattern that covers the entirety of the quilt? Are you going to stitch in the ditch? Are you going to only stitch certain areas? You have to figure out what exactly you want to do. And I am going to only stitch certain areas. So what I'm going to start with is I am going to unfold this, because right now it's just folded up right here. I'm going to unfold this and start by stitching a giant T into it right in the ditch where all 4 quadrants meet. And what I mean by in the ditch, if you aren't familiar with that term, I'm basically going to stitch directly into the seam line. And that way the stitch is as invisible as possible, and it will, hopefully you won't see it, or it won't pop out at least to you when you're looking at the face of the quilt. So I'm going to start by doing that. And then I think I'm going to actually go through and stitch all the way around the outside of each dog. That way you see that stitching will translate to the back of the quilt as well. So when you're looking at the back of it, you'll see the outlines of all 4 dogs as well. And I think that would look pretty cool. So I'm going to start by doing that. And after we have done that, I will evaluate from there if I need to do any more, or if I feel like that is pretty secure enough that we can just move on to finishing the quilt. So what I have to do is basically open it up entirely, and then this over here is the seam that I am stitching. Actually, halt. The first thing I need to do is change my bobbin thread to match this blue. I do have a blue that will match that really well. That works well. I need to switch that, otherwise this back thread would all be gray, and I don't want that. I'm fine with that for the top of the quilt. I don't want that for the bottom. So let me switch that out quick. So that is switched now. So what I have to do is I have to open this quilt up entirely, and because I have to get from this end clear over to here, I need to put the quilt under my machine here. Cool. When you probably can't see what I'm doing. Let me angle you so you can see a little better here. Hopefully you can see that. Also, you're crooked. Sorry. There you go. So you basically have to feed the quilt under the machine, the presser foot here, and then start rolling it so it fits under there. And I need to make sure I am doing this to keep things organized. There we go. I know I could have rolled it and then moved it under, but I wanted to do it this way, so it's fine. Okay, so got all that. I'm already exhausted. Okay, throw all of this part of the quilt up into my lap so it's there and out of the way. Come all the way down to this edge, and actually I'm gonna grab this, which is like a gardening glove, but it has like grippy on the, like the grippy material on this side, and I like using this when I'm sewing the tops of quilts because then it helps me grip the fabric without having to like squish it in my hands. I can just lay my hand on and it grips it really well, and it makes it much easier to move and like the whole quilt around. Alright, I have the T sewn, which was the easy part. Now, I've already gone ahead and you can see I've folded the quilt in such a way that trusty here is really the only square out. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just gonna follow the shape of the dog. Okay, I just turned it over. I got the whole outline done. I'm going to need to do more sewing somewhere in each quadrant. I'm just not sure how I'm going to go about it yet, because when you're top stitching a quilt like this, you don't want to leave too much space between your stitch lines, because the further apart your stitch lines are, the more you risk the batting in the middle starting to clump over time with use and wear, and if whoever owns it like throws it or in the wash or has it dry cleaned. If the batting is in there and it isn't like sewn to the quilt, you run more of a risk of the larger sections that don't have any stitches in them starting to come apart and clumping together. And it's not the end of the world. That's something that would happen way down the line anyway, even if it was left alone. But it's still one of those things that if I can avoid it, just to make my quilts last even longer, I want to avoid it. So, like, I think the outlines of each dog will be enough for the dog themselves. I don't think I need to do anything more with them. But in the case of Tramp and Trusty, both of them, you can see, like, there is Trusty, but there's this whole area over here that doesn't have anything. So I'm going to have to do something over here, and I'm just not quite sure what it's going to be yet. I might end up just top stitching square star type looking things that follow, for the most part, the lines of some of the like lines in the front, so that from the front it's not very visible, but from the back it's an extra cool design that you wouldn't have noticed unless you were looking at the back. So I think that's what I might do, just to kind of help fill in those big gaps a little more. All right, the Trusty line or Trusty square is completely done, and not gonna lie, if this video was not due to go live in like 2 days, I would probably call it quits tonight and come back to this tomorrow, because this part is just so tedious, having to sew in all of the ditches and hoist this massive quilt every which way, and I just almost dropped you, sorry. Sometimes this is the most fun part. Other times it's not the most fun part. Like, I'm going to be thrilled when it's done. I'm gonna look at it and I'm gonna be so happy that I did all of the work. I just, right now, in the midst of doing the work, I just don't want to do it anymore. So I'm gonna go ahead, switch this thread out, the top thread out, for some green thread and get working on Jacques. And hopefully his will go a little faster. I was exaggerating that last clip. I should have just kept going and not complained about how much I didn't want to, because once I got into the groove of it, it went by very quickly and it was very easy to do. So now I have the entire face of the quilt done. It is all done. It's currently just laying out. I just finished taking all of the pins off of it. So the entire top of the quilt is finished. So now what I need to do is I will go all the way around and I will trim this batting right up to the edge here. And then I will go back around and measure out this backing and measure it to the exact length that I need it to be, so that I can fold it over and fold it over again onto here so I can pin and sew it to the front to close up the quilt. And then we're done. This quilt is finished. It is late at night, but I am determined to get this done tonight. So we are going to grab a snack and then get going on this. Okay, just wanted to show you really quick what I'm doing, because I'm not actually time-lapsing any of this. So I have all of the batting cut, so it's basically even with that. It's not perfect. And now I'm going around and using a pen and my ruler just to mark out roughly an inch. And I'm drawing a line all the way around, and then I'm gonna go back and cut that with my scissors so that I have an inch. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that and I'm going to fold it in half. So it's in half right up against this. And then I'm gonna take that and fold it in half over the quilt. And then I'm gonna pin that. And once it's pinned all the way around, then I'm gonna go back through and sew right up against the seam so that when it's done, there should be just about 1/4 of an inch piece all the way around the entire quilt. And then we're done.
It's
like knocking me over.
Well, yeah. It's a windy day.
Oh no. Wow.
There we go. Look at that. Oh gosh. There we go. Beautiful. Good job, dear. Good job.
It's done. This quilt is giant, and I'm so happy that I finally got around to doing it. So this quilt is going up on my Etsy shop at 9 a.m. on Monday, May 5th. If you are wanting to grab it, there is only one. I am not making more than one of these. No, no, no. So if this is a quilt you want to grab for yourself or grab for a loved one, whether it just be a gift because you love them or be a special occasion, make sure to head over to my Etsy shop as soon as that date hits, May 5th. That is a Monday at 9 a.m. so that you can grab this because there is only one. If somebody else buys it, you're out of luck. Something I do really want to be able to do is offer commissions. So if you see this quilt and you're like, oh, that's so cool, but Lady and the Tramp isn't my favorite, I would rather have a pixelated quilt of Buzz Lightyear or Sadness from Inside Out. Message me. Let's chat. Thank you so much for hanging out with me as I made this entire quilt, as I learned, did trial and error, used up a bunch of fabric that I had. I will see you guys in next week's video where there will be one more reminder about this drop. With all of that, I'm ending the video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in next week's video. Bye.
Go ahead. Look at that.
It's like knocking me over.
Well, yeah. It's a windy day.
Oh no. Wow.
There we go. Look at that. Oh gosh.